Hello there. Welcome to DMT Highway. Don't forget to subscribe for your daily dose. Let's trip.
Piano in the woods. A little bit of background about myself. I've worked my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest woods, over 15 years in total, with about 7 years of that being for the Park Service at Olympic National Park. Many experiences over the years could warrant the title of creepy. This one, in particular, has always stuck with me. While working for the Park Service, one of my jobs was that of a restoration carpenter. We would travel to old backcountry historical cabins, emergency shelters, homesteads, and chalets, tasked with repairing and restoring them to their original historic accurate states. This was a wonderful and demanding job. I'd spend 8 days at a time living off the beaten path, usually deep in the backcountry. Sometimes we'd be flown in supplies, sometimes we'd use llamas or mules to pack our gear. All the while sleeping in thinly walled single tents, cooking over a fire whisper light stove, using the same tools and techniques the original homesteaders had at their disposal in the late 1800s to construct and survive in this unforgiving environment. One late fall I was assigned to work near Lake Izette at an old homestead off the trail, near the constructed boardwalk. For those unfamiliar with the area, Lake Izette is 8 miles long and 3 miles wide. It sits as the largest unaltered natural lake in Washington. Lake Izette has a long and rich history of Native American culture. The Maca Tribal Center in Bay houses discoveries found in the area dating back 2,000 years, along with a local village that was well preserved over 300 years ago by a mudslide that left most of the artifacts intact. The Izette Loop Trail, which the homestead was directly adjacent to, is approximately 9.4 miles through and through. The man-made boardwalk takes you under giant cedar groves, meanders through huge patches of chest-high sill, before delivering you to Alstrom's Prairie about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Alstrom's Prairie, a giant soggy meadow, was once farmed by 2 Swedish immigrants. They constructed a small cabin and some outbuildings on the 150-acre bog. With cattle, sheep, vegetable gardens, and the help of a little Swedish ingenuity, they managed to etch out lives for themselves here for over 50 years. Over time, the forest, as it always does, decided to take back what was once its own. The now decades-long abandoned farm was hardly recognizable. Our job was to beat back the encroaching forest, put new windows in the main cabin, pipe in a new stove, apply fresh paint, and fix up portions of the semi-dilapidated barn. The ultimate goal is to allow guided tours to take place sometime in the future. For about 3 weeks we stayed at the Izette bunkhouse while working at Alstrom's. This was a good duty for us. We weren't sleeping under the rain, our beds were warm, our hike was short, and the terrain not difficult. We even had a TV. The bunkhouse was located near the highway and ranger station. We would hike the 5-mile loop every day, bringing with us boards, tools, paint, and everything else we needed on our backs. These wee full 10-plus-hour days usually started our morning hike around 0700 and beginning our evening return hike back to the bunkhouse around 1700. At one point during the fall, there were 4 of us working on this project, but at the time of this event, there were only 2 of us remaining. Most of the hard work had already been finished. We needed to hike a few last boards into the prairie to complete a portion of the woodshed before we called the job done. I volunteered to be the pack mule for the day. My only job is to carry as many boards as I could muster in each trip to the prairie before returning to the ranger station for the next load. It was late in the season for hikers at this point, the weather had turned, and we'd be lucky to see 2 to 3 people a day doing the loop. After around my 4th or the 5th trip I was pretty wiped. It was getting late in the evening now, around 1600, and my coworker had called it a day. I thought I could get one more trip in before it got too dark, my rationale being the more trips I did today the less I would have to do tomorrow. We passed on the trail, I told him my intentions and continued on. I delivered the last of the boards for the day, took a look around the prairie as the sun started to tuck behind the trees, and started my hour hike back to the ranger station. The lighting on the boardwalk was quite low at this point, the cedars blocking most of the ambient light left by the setting sun and making visibility quite diminished. I'm not a nervous hiker and fail to spook easily, having solo hiked for weeks on end in the backcountry. I've been stalked by cougars, confronted by Kodiak bears in Alaska, even ran into a few demented hillbillies over the years. As I left the prairie that evening, the hair on my neck stood on end, goosebumps erupted from my forearms. An uneasy feeling swept over me. Suddenly I wanted to walk faster, jog, then sprint. I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself I'd been reading too many fantasy novels before bedtime. I walked another 5 minutes or so before I started to hear something faint, something that sounded like music. Impossible, I told myself. I'm the only one out here and still at least 2 miles from civilization. That civilization in reality is likely the only other soul out there, my coworker. Sure enough, however, I heard music, more specifically a piano. It started out so faint I had to stop moving and actually try to hear it, the steps on the wooden boardwalk being too loud. Every time I paused to hear it, it became unmistakable, it got louder. I stood there, the sun now fully hidden behind the horizon, in total silence other than this piano. I became aware that there was no longer the noise of life, no birds, no insects, no wind, no rustling of leaves or underbrush, absolutely nothing other than the piano. As if everything was being weighted down by a fog of emptiness of some sort. I've encountered this dead time before in the woods, certain places have it, but this was different somehow, unique to this place, unique to this moment in time. I tried to focus on the keys, but I couldn't recognize the composition, unsurprising as I mostly listened to Metallica and Korn at the time. It was playing with a purpose, it was controlled, in tune, thoughtful. It was a song and somehow I felt that it was meant just for me at this moment. I started walking again, almost on cue the music once again got louder. As my pace increased, so did the tempo of the keys, still in tune never faltering. It reached a climax, the perfect combination of my haste, my dread, my heartbeat, and the tempo of the music. Then as quickly as it came the piano stopped, whooshed away in the fraction of a moment. It didn't trail off, it didn't fade into extinction, it was just gone. Suddenly everything that was absent was swept away as if by a gust of wind. The stillness was gone, the gloom, the stagnation, and the weight of everything were lifted. My next step on the boardwalk was once again in reality. The evening was just as absent of light as before, but it felt like life, somehow, was once again injected back into the forest. The woods seemed normal again. I didn't hear the piano again that night, nor since. I told my co-worker every detail when I reached the bunkhouse, he showed no signs of disbelief. We didn't talk about it again until years later when something similar happened to another Park Service employee. When I told my grandfather about what happened, as he was a retired park ranger who had worked nearby at Mora, the next station over without the least bit of hesitation he asked, "Did you hear the bagpipes along with it, or just the piano this time?" It seems as I've learned and experienced since then, there is a lot more to that place, a lot more to the Olympics in general, than anyone really knows or is willing to admit.